Why do molecules form? The reason has to do with a very fundamental property of our universe, and that is that the material in it has this tendency to want to be particular types of elements. They want to be what we call the noble gases or the major inert elements that are over here on the right-hand side of the periodic table. Helium, neon, argon, xenon, radon, and so on. Of course, they don't really want to be this way, so don't get the idea that these atoms are thinking about anything. But by want to be this way, what I mean is all of these atoms are essentially stable only if the number of electrons that are in their outer energy shell is a particular number. Okay, now, you may or may not remember energy shells and how it is that the electrons pack into these atoms. This comes all the way down to what you were taught before as the Bohr atom, which is funny because Niels Bohr, the person after whom that's named, showed that this is exactly not what they are. They're not these little balls that are going in orbit around the nucleus. He showed that that was not what it was. It's much more complicated. We'll talk about that here in just a moment because I want you to have a much more accurate picture than this picture that's on the page. But what this picture is showing you is how the electrons pack into the energy shells. So here, we start with hydrogen. Hydrogen has one electron. That electron, like everything else in this universe, is trying to get to its lowest energy state, or it's just stable at its lowest energy state. So under normal conditions, this electron is at its lowest energy state, which is the lowest energy state that an electron can have in any element. Now, if we want to make from this hydrogen helium, what we'd have to do then is add another proton, probably a couple of neutrons, and then another electron to make it electrically neutral. So here we are at helium. The second electron that's added to make helium also can fit into this lowest energy state. But the problem is the lowest energy state can only fit 2 electrons. So if we make from helium lithium, we add another proton, typically another neutron, and then we do add another electron. The third electron cannot go into this lowest energy state, which is represented by this circle. It can only fit into the next lowest energy state, which is represented by this circle outside of the inner one. And so the electrons are bound into this lithium atom such that the 2 electrons are at its lowest energy state that fills that shell, what we call a valence shell, and the third one ends up at the next shell up, or the next energy level up. And so then you make beryllium, you add another electron, and that second shell can accommodate the next electron. Boron adds another electron, a 5th electron, and so the next electron can be held also in that second energy state. Carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, and neon all can add electrons successively into this next energy state. But notice what happens. Once we get to neon, the number of electrons here is 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Once you get to neon and you want to make sodium, and you add another electron here, this 8 octet is now full. This energy state can only hold 8 electrons. And therefore, to make sodium from this, you add another proton and so on, but then you add another electron. The electron can no longer fit in either of the 2 lowest energy shells. This one, which already has 2 and is full, this one, which now has 8 and is full, and so now the next electron goes to the next energy state. Magnesium, add another one, its electron goes into this next energy state. So how many electrons fit into the third energy state? Well, again, if you count these coming from left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in the next 2 energy shells outside of the middle one, they each hold 8. They each hold an octet. And that's pretty much all the chemistry you need to know. That's not true. That's basically the basic chemistry that you need to know for biology. All the transition metal stuff and the way that those things pack in and all the other things you don't need to worry about because those living systems that we deal with, in fact all living systems, simply don't have chemistry that deals with those kinds of electrons. They deal with these electrons here. But now notice, helium, neon, and argon all have the same property. Their outer energy state, in this case the outer energy state of helium is the first energy state. Neon, it's the second. Argon, it's the third. These outer energy levels are completely full. That's why they're stable. And that is the essence of chemistry. The stability arises when the outside energy state, the highest energy state, is completely full of electrons. And that's what leads to these molecules. Notice the molecules, the atoms, pardon me, that are involved in forming these molecules, none of them are helium, neon, or argon. That's because these don't generally form chemical bonds. Their outer shells are full, and so they're inert. But things like carbon, for example, and oxygen have spaces in their outer shells. Carbon has 4 spaces. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4 in this outer energy state, which can hold 8. Therefore, it's missing 4. There's 4 open holes for electrons to fill, if you will. That's a strange way of looking at it. So carbon can form 4 bonds. 1 hydrogen here, 1 hydrogen here, 1 hydrogen here, 1 hydrogen here. The reason it does that is because of this basic principle. The first principle is that atoms with an full outer shell tend to be inert. Those are the noble gases that we talked about, the helium, the argon, the neon, so on. But principle 2 is this, is that atoms that have spaces available in their valence shell will react with other atoms until the valence shell is full. Now, in this case, you have 2 hydrogens. Here's an example. This hydrogen has 1 electron in its outer energy state. Its outer energy state can hold 2 electrons. Therefore, it has 1 open space. This one, same thing. So what they do is this. This electron and this electron basically split their density around the 2 nuclei. Okay, now here's where I want you to change your view of how this works. The Bohr atom is typically represented in this way, where you have this little ball that circles this bigger ball. The bigger ball represents the nucleus, the little ball represents the electron. Really what this is a smear of something that's very, very hard to describe. But this smear of stuff that is around this hydrogen, this electron smear, has a spherical shape. This one also has a spherical shape. When these electrons are shared between the 2 nuclei, that sphere and this sphere form an oblong sort of smear around both of the 2 nuclei, and that forms what's called a covalent bond. So you see this one covalent bond has 2 electrons that form it. So that is the connection between these 2, and that's why these things form bonds. Because now look at a hydrogen here. This hydrogen is sharing these 2 electrons. So as far as it's concerned, its inner energy state is full. So it is basically as happy as helium. This one is too. Its 2 electrons are also full in its outer energy state, and so it is essentially as happy as helium. Now that's technically not correct. These electrons still hold a lot of energy in them, and so therefore hydrogen gas can actually explode when you mix it with oxygen. In fact, we use this as rocket fuel for that very purpose. But the point is that this is locally stable. This is stable in the sense that this is not going to explode unless you add energy to it. And the reason is because now these 2 electrons are essentially making these hydrogens into something like helium. Now, this happens all over the place. Here's water. Notice water has 6 electrons in its outer shell. Let's go back up to here. We look at oxygen here. I said water, I mean oxygen. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which means it has 2 open holes. Hydrogen, again, has 1 open hole. Open hole, again, being a space for an electron. So here, then, a hydrogen shares an electron with this oxygen who shares an electron with it, and so now you get electron density split between these 2 nuclei, and that forms a covalent bond here. Same thing here. Oxygen forms a covalent bond with a second hydrogen. Now, look at oxygen's outer octet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It now sees itself essentially as now not helium, but as neon. You see that? So now we have a space here and a space here now full, and oxygen is acting like neon, so it's happy. Same thing here with nitrogen, same thing here with carbon. If you go through that same thought process, you'll see in each case you get these shared electrons that then complete this outer energy shell for all of the atoms involved, and that makes the molecule stable. This can happen in other ways too. For example, carbon and oxygen can share, instead of 2 electrons between a carbon and an oxygen, but 4. They share 4. In which case then what you have is what's called a double covalent bond. So 2 covalent bonds then will be 4 electrons. And carbon has 4 open holes. Oxygen only has 2. So these 4 completely satisfy oxygen but don't satisfy carbon. So carbon goes to another oxygen and shares another 2 electrons with oxygen's 2 electrons for a total of 4. This second oxygen is now complete, and also now is the carbon. You see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that makes carbon dioxide, again, very, very stable. And of course, we can do this even like this, where we have triple bonds, where you have 3 pairs of electrons. And that's called then a triple covalent bond. It's rare that you get quadruple covalent bonds or higher. These are the three then that you really need to understand and study when you're studying biology.